So you've decided that you want to do solo play. So you made up some characters, you got your dice ready, and you're sitting there like, now what do I do? Let's talk about it after the intro. Hi folks, and welcome to Sharp Mountain Games. Here we talk about group role-playing games, solo role-playing games, and there are plenty of actual plays in the playlist. You can check out our print and PDF products at Amazon, Lulu, drivethrur, and Roll20, and they're all linked below. Let's get started, and we're glad you're here. So you're all ready to go. You're all ready to have a good time solo playing, and you're thinking, well, now what do I do? So there's a few approaches to getting ready that we can look at, and I'm also going to save, I have what I think is kind of a super top tip, and I'm going to save that for the end. So how do you get ready? How do you get ready, and do you plan? First of all, you do not have to plan anything. You really don't. You can go completely random. You can roll all your encounters and rooms as you go. Now, you will need some charts, but let's face it, most RPG books give you some possible random charts to go with, or there's all kind of random charts you can buy. You can use AI if you want. Now, there's a couple of great channels. TTRPG Jared and Solo Spelunking really do this random method of adventure generating and playing randomly. And let's be honest, better than what I do. So I want to link them below. I think it's always nice to give a shout out to other solo RPG folks. Now, this approach of going totally random, using a book of charts or books with charts in them, I really think it works really nicely for dungeon and fantasy type games. I also think it can work for sci-fi games if you're doing something like maybe you're a smuggler or a trader, like you want to play a certain style of Star Wars or Firefly. Now, there's another no planning option for your solo play that I think maybe sometimes gets overlooked, and that's to use published adventures. Yeah, that's no planning. All you have to do is read them as you go and run your characters through them, and everything's fine. It's a great way to try out an adventure, especially if you want to run it for a group of your own or you want to use it for a convention. And let's face it, it's also a great way to actually use what you purchased, get your money's worth out of things. One thing I would say is, don't feel so beholden to them that you have to go piece by piece. Adapt them to your situation. Another thing I would really, really try to avoid is to try to linearly play through a long adventure path book like Curse of Strahd. I tried that not with Curse of Strahd, but with a different book. And it really felt very railroady for the characters. It really felt like I was playing like more through a novel. Can you imagine trying to play through The Lord of the Rings or something, or a movie? Now, I certainly would say use adventures from those adventure path books. I'm not knocking the books, but just don't feel like you have to go piece by piece and, okay, then after they do this, they do that. I think you need to allow your characters to grow, or it's more fulfilling if they can go off on their own adventures and paths too. Now, if you don't want to go completely random, you can certainly start with at least a first scene or few in mind. And I'll be honest, that's usually the way I do it. I usually have a main villain and a major objective maybe in mind, and at least a starting point. Not necessarily the whole adventure. Like I said, I'm not trying to necessarily make it like the linear adventure paths. But these are ideas that'll come to mind during the day, when you're taking a walk. And now I do use random tables to spur my creativity. Absolutely. There was something that I needed, sort of a monster encounter I wanted, and I rolled and I got like a chameleon hawk. That's something I never would have thought up on my own, and it really made the monsters more dangerous too, in that they could kind of blend in when they attacked the party. So random tables, great. However, I tend to use them more for planning rather than on the fly. I don't necessarily have them on the fly. Sometimes I'll roll a dice on the fly to organize it. But we're talking about planning, so let me show you one method for organizing your play. It's just something that I had handy and I thought I'd show it to you. I used this for a particular session, and now you'll notice there's only about 3 scenes or so. You don't want to plan out a whole novel. And I would say I don't always plan things in this detail. A lot of times I just have a note card with a few little bits of information on it, just some starting points or maybe some stats. However, this was an adventure that I also wanted to run with a group, so I was using solo to test it out. So we're going to take a second here and we're going to look at my notes. So you can see what I have here is I have my characters at the top of the screen there. This was just a Word document and I took a picture of it. You don't have to do it that way. Again, sometimes I just put them all on a piece of paper here. I think it's handy to have them all in one place, or you can use note cards and lay the note cards out on your desk, or your table, wherever you're working. Now, this was for Tricube Tales, so that worked out really well because these are very, very, you can stat your characters out very, very simply. This is a design issue for me that I really, or philosophy, that I really, really prefer. Nothing much more than an index card for solo play. I don't like the super complicated character sheets. It's a lot to keep track of when you're also trying to run several characters and run your game. But you do you. If you like a more complicated system, that's certainly up to you. And then you can see what I did here. I always try to think when I do my planning in terms of challenges. What are the things that they're going to have to overcome along the way? Now, for this, I have little boxes there, which I use. Each scene has a hit points, basically, or scene points in Tricube Tales. And that's how I did it. But also, even if you're planning about this, think a little bit about the fail state. Not necessarily that, okay, if they fail, how do I keep them on track? Although that's possible. But okay, if they fail, how is the next encounter going to be more difficult? At least for me, that's how I think about fail state. So even if I want to do linear, hey, if you don't get past the first encounter or you have some troubling dice rolls, how's that going to affect things down the line? And then I also have a list of the NPC names up there in the right. I don't think this is anything special or anything, revolutionary, but it does help me keep things online, keep things in order when I'm playing. And I like to focus on NPCs. I think that's a good thing, at least for my own planning, that sometimes we neglect. Sometimes I neglect too. Now, one concern that really might be popping up in your mind is, aren't you railroading a plot? And I agree that can be a danger. You definitely need to leave room for failure, like the failure state, as I said. And you may have to improvise a scene or two that you didn't plan for. But one thing to think about, too, is if you severely fail during a combat encounter, that maybe it's time for them to retreat or to try to get another party member and come back another day. Boy, that's now taking your story in a direction you didn't plan. Or maybe the supervillain gets away. That's fine. I had some superheroes get badly beaten by a supervillain. Well, that's fine. That'll lead us to where our next adventure is. So those are the kind of things you have to deal with, not only in solo games, you have to deal with them in group games too, that improvisation. So another thing to think about is only plan short adventures. That's another way to avoid the railroad. You really want to be planning like a 22-minute He-Man cartoon or Transformers or whatever you like. You don't want to be planning Game of Thrones. And also that way, each adventure can build on the last. So if you have a PC get badly hurt, I had that happen. Hey, there's my next adventure. You have to go back to the homeland so that this PC can refresh and heal himself or get healed. And of course, when they get to the homeland, there's a problem there for them to deal with. So the dice led me right into the next chapter of the story. Okay, time for the top tip. And again, this is not going to be anything revolutionary, but I think it really works for solo play, and I think it works for group play also. So whether you're going completely random, whether you're working from some rough notes or trying to go through a published adventure, there are times when you're going to get stuck. So here's the top tip. Think about what the characters are feeling. Maybe even write a line or two down of that if you're journaling or, writing things on scrap paper. Are your characters frustrated, frightened? Are they overconfident? This can be just as powerful as any random chart for figuring out what they might do next or where the story might go next. And I think really overall, it's more memorable. You're getting much closer to these characters, which is really what it should be all about. And then you can use those characters' feelings and aspirations when you're thinking about the next session. What went well this session? What didn't? Where might this lead them? So when I'm thinking about an adventure, maybe I have a list of ideas or I got them from a random chart and it feels flat. It's because I didn't take the time yet to connect my characters to it. What in their personal goals will really help? So what are your tips for planning or playing a solo session? I don't say that I have all the answers, and I also don't say there's only one way to do it. But please, let's keep this conversation going. Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. If you can like and subscribe, that's great. Have a great rest of your day.